Good Pod Guide. Good Pod Guide. This is the Good Pod Guide, where you'll be pleased to hear I don't do any more singing. Instead, I, Lauren Windle, will guide you through the abundance of podcasts to help you hone in on your next obsession. We have a tendency in society to place things in boxes and categories by contrasting and comparing them to things we already know of. Now, that's totally natural and totally normal. So an example of this would be like, oh, Loose Women. That's the British version of the American show, The View. And, you know, Loose Women does stand on its own. And you could just explain it as, oh, a panel show of women who are menopausal and discussing interesting things, you know. Or you could just summarize it with a comparison of The View, which is a concept a lot of people already know. So I am, or have been, described as the Christian version of Dolly Alderton. Dolly Alderton is a writer who writes about love and dating. She's a columnist for the Sunday Times and does their dating column, their sort of agony aunt thing. And she also wrote a book called Everything I Know About Love, which was really well received and very funny memoir that talked about her sort of coming of age and realizing that true love was to be found with friends and not men. And it really blew up at the time. I have subsequently written a book called Notes on Love, which is out in July 2021. And it's basically about dating and love and being single, but in the context of being in a church and in a church community and what that means. And I have been touted around as the Christian Dolly Alderton by various PR and articles and things like that, which is flattering, I think. You know, I would like to get to the point where people see my work as the touchstone by which they can sort of justify other people's. But if I have to be compared to anyone, I'll take Dolly Alderton for now. I hope she's flattered. I imagine she doesn't even know. And down the line, my aspiration is for there to be a Jewish Lauren Windle. And if and when she materializes, I'm going to take her for a coffee. And I really look forward to that day. Anyway, I'm telling you about Dolly Alderton because I'm going to talk to you about her podcast with Pandora Sykes called The High-Low. I wasn't initially going to review this podcast because it's about current affairs and it's no longer running. So I can hear you asking, why on earth would I go back and listen to back episodes of something which is no longer relevant? And the answer to that is because it is still relevant. I've actually journeyed with this podcast longer than any other. It has been with me for years. It helped me train for 2 half marathons. I spent the summer with me in New York and kept me company during lockdown. So it just felt like a bit mean not to give it a shout out. They discuss news articles from the week. And even though those news articles are no longer currently in the news, the topics and the themes that they bring up are still very much a part of daily conversation. So they'll tackle things like race and feminism. And I remember this discussion on Catholicism and whether or not the Met Gala's theme of fashion and the Catholic imagination was offensive or celebratory. And I think we would still get so much out of listening to that today, even though the Met Gala was a few years ago. They bring in bits of good news and funny news, which quite frankly never goes out of fashion, as well as pop culture, stuff that you may already be aware of and stuff that you may not. For example, they introduced me to a story which is probably one of my favorite news stories of all time. I've tried to find a mug with this catchphrase on and I can't, so I may just have one printed myself because anyone who listens to this knows I love a good slogan mug. So the story is that the Bishop of Southwark, I think he says that he may have had his drinks spiked, but he also may have just had one too many drinks at a Christmas party. I'm not quite clear on that. But he was apprehended by police having broken into someone else's car. And he was throwing Christmas presents from the back seat out of the window. And when the police asked what he was doing, he said the line, "I'm the Bishop of Southwark. It's what I do." And I can't tell you how much mileage I've had out of that story. And I wouldn't have had it if I'd never listened to The High-Low. So I'm grateful to them for that. should you retrospectively listen to one of the 152 podcasts from the past? Yes, I'd say yeah. Listen to a few. I don't think you need to listen to the whole back catalogue, but you will be entertained by the discussions. They also recommend like 4 or 5 books per show, as well as talking about the TV shows and podcasts that they've been into that week. And those recommendations are worth it. They very much have their finger on the pulse. I wouldn't say I always agree with what they loved, but I'm never sad that I invested the time in reading or watching it. That's for sure, because it's always things which are widely discussed and worth knowing about, quite frankly. So the episodes in particular that don't date that I think are worth checking out are the author specials. So if you go to the list of the podcasts that are out, you can just type in author and that'll narrow it down for you. I particularly loved the one with Yomi and Elizabeth, who wrote Slay in Your Lane, or Graham Norton was on as well, and I'm a big fan of his. The choice is yours. This podcast is great. It's iconic and even paved the way, I'd say, for other women's discussion podcasts, which are a bit sort of copycatty at times. I really enjoyed it, and I think that there's enough there that's still relevant for you to give it a go. In the next episode, I managed to shamelessly shoehorn the fact that I have a neuroscience degree as we discuss the podcast Good Job Brain, which turns out to have nothing to do with neuroscience at all. For more info on the Good Pod Guide, check out the show notes. Also, like, subscribe, and leave a positive review. It makes a big difference.